I'm just doing a quick test of what's in my notes that says you can put a backslash apostrophe inside an apostrophe string, but no other escape characters work, so let's just give that a quick test. Obviously, this isn't going to work because there's an apostrophe inside of my literal. And by the way, there's a comma here because I don't know if it was during the break or just before, John was doing some research on Stack Overflow and said the most efficient way to use echoes is not to embed variables inside of strings like this, but just list them separated by commas and then some literals and then another variable and then another with commas. Embedding is the least efficient. I only use it for testing. But this is the second thing I'm echoing, and notice it's got an apostrophe inside it. So I should be able to do this. Even though the apostrophe string normally avoids escape character or ignores escape characters, it seems to work. Notice there's no spacing here. We saw some of the spacing issues last time. When you do this list, you've got to do your own spacing. It's like concatenating. That's just concatenating with a comma instead of a dot. Really, right? But echoing a list of things is more efficient than first taking this list, making it into a string, concatenating it, and then spitting it out. Guess. At least that's what Stack Overflow says. To me, the commas, what happens to them? If you send them to echo, they're kind of like parameters, and it's an array of parameters, and now you got to process the array and concatenate them. I don't know. Okay, so yes, that does work. So now we want to talk a little bit about string functions. Remember in Programming Logic Intermediate, we started with string functions, and we hit a few of them when we were working in web programming. String processing, do a lot of it. These are some functions that you might end up using. There's an empty function that says, is the string empty? There's a length function. There's a substring function that basically says to pull from this string, starting at this position, zero based, for this many characters. And notice that's optional. If you leave this out, it starts in position 3, for instance, and gives you everything to the end of the string. Also notice that this is a length. What some languages allow you to do is say, give me everything from position, and many do it this way, from position 2 to position 6. Here, I don't know which is better. I find myself normally knowing that I need about 3 or 4. But sometimes I want everything from one comma to the next comma. And I know the positions of the commas, and it's much nicer to say, give me everything from here to here. But that's not how this one works. This one says, give me a length, so I'd have to do the math to figure out how many characters are between the commas and then extract the text. There's a string position, similar to index of in most other languages. What's the index of S2 inside of S1, starting at position 5? Why would I want to start at position 5? Again, maybe I'm looking for commas. I already found one in position 5. So now, or 4. So now start at position 5 and see if there's any more commas. Normally you leave the offset off. But again, this says find S1 in S2. There are different versions of string pos. The I is case insensitive. So you don't have to do the 2 upper stuff. You just do a string position insensitive and it'll find anything that's close to it, capitalization wise. There's an rpos which says search from the end of the string to the beginning of the string. And then there's an ripos which is end of the string, case insensitive. Lots of versions of string replace. What always gives me goofy fits here is the underscore. Why isn't there an underscore here? I would mark that a half off, but it's a little too late. I don't think they care anymore. So there's an underscore in there. That's why there's notes. That's why there's Google. String replace. So here replaces S1 with the new string in S2. To me, that's not quite right either. I always want to start with the string name. But here, the string that you're searching is at the end. This is what you're searching for, and this is what you're replacing it with. If you wish, you can search for an entire array of characters and replace them all at once. Never needed that, but I can kind of picture some examples. And then there's the insensitive replace. There's a regular expression replace where you put a pattern in here, replace anything that matches this pattern with that pattern. You can add a G to the pattern to make it global, to do multiple replaces in that string. If you need to, if you have a number, maybe it's a Unicode number and you want a happy face or something on your screen. Remember all that goofy stuff we did with iOS when we first started? Put all these squirrely characters in there that we've never done since. Almost forgot that we did that. This does the reverse. Here's the character, give me its ASCII value. We don't process much that way anymore. We used to. We can implode and explode. Those are functions. An array. So if you give it an array of strings, it'll implode them, turn them into one array. Or you can give it a string and explode it into an array. That I've done many times.
What happens to the spaces when you do that?
Normally they're ignored. Spaces or commas, I think you get to display a delimiter. If you need those, they're in the book to describe, or Google it. But you probably get to designate what the delimiter is. It could be comma and a space. Could be dashes, could be semicolons, whatever you want it to be. I remember we did that, I think, last semester with dates. We took a date apart using a dash as a delimiter. It's one way to do it. And it creates an array with 3 elements. But normally when you do that, the delimiter is just discarded. String case compare is a case insensitive compare of 2 strings. So you can in C#, or where am I now? PHP. You can in PHP say if string 1 is less than string 2, but that's a ASCII by ASCII character comparison. If you use case compare, then it compares them and gives you either a negative number or 0 or a positive number. Negative means S1 is less than. 0 means they're the same. We have to do some research. That's not one I've ever used. And then this one's interesting, a string natural compare. If you have an array of strings that contain numbers, you do this, 2 comes up less than 10. Remember, normally they're alphabetized in the 1, 10, 100, 2, 20, 21. This compares natural numbers. This started happening, I don't know if you've noticed it, in Windows a couple of years. It hasn't been that long, a couple of years ago. If you name files with numbers on them, and I do that occasionally, folders with numbers on them, and then sort them, you get the 1s, the 10s, the 11s, the 2s, the 20s. They stopped doing that a few years ago. It is all of a sudden, it recognizes the numbers and it uses them as numbers instead. There are trim functions, left, right, and all the above to remove any white space from the beginning or all the way around a string, but not from inside. This never removes spaces from inside a string. We can typecast using parentheses, just like C#. Takes this string, converts it to an integer. Remember, normally you don't have to do that, just like in JavaScript, we were doing math with strings. In JavaScript, it only caused a problem when we were adding them, because in JavaScript that was concatenation, but it's not here. So here, if you take variable 1 plus variable 2, it's going to add them and do the best it can if there aren't numbers inside. You can also convert something to a float if that's what we need it to do. Dates, the scourge of web programming. Just remember, we're writing programs that will be used anywhere in the world. And when somebody enters a date and said, this is when I'm going to ship it, well, what date is that? I'm guessing if you're writing that kind of app, you get very good at Greenwich Mean Time type stuff. There is an old class built into PHP called a timestamp class. If you do some research on dates, you'll often get a timestamp solution. But timestamps are going to cause problems according to our book, and I Googled it once upon a time, forgot about it, but somewhere around 2038, they're going to crash. Probably because of the way the dates are stored in timestamps. So today, for any new development, you should use the date time class. Here's an example. Instantiate an object, a date time object. In this case, give me the current date and time. Very similar to what we've done in other languages.
How do you get just the date? Is it datetime.date or just?
You can format it. I don't know. I don't think you can do just datetime.date or new. There's no date class. Okay. But you can set it to an original date and then leave the time off. If you leave the time off, you automatically get 12 a.m. Here's a date create that's an alias for this class. So this is just a function that does this basically. And you can also set times, you can set dates, but if you use these set methods, these are methods inside the date class. Now already has to be instantiated as a variable, like I did up here. Okay. So this declares a date time object. This sets the date and time in that object to something other than what it was initialized to. Before I forget though, let me see if I can remember how to do this. PHP by default, when it comes in, PHP was developed in Germany somewhere, I'm guessing, because the default time zone is Berlin. And so when you install it after downloading it from just about anywhere, the time zone is Berlin. So every time you want to ask what time is it, you think dates are the scourge, times are even worse. What time is it? You will get a time that's off by 5 or 6 hours depending on what's happened with daylight savings time. So to fix this, we need to find our PHP ini file, which is in the xamp PHP folder. So let me just walk through that once if I can. So I'm supposed to go to my xamp folder, PHP, and then find the PHP ini file. There it is. And I can open that in Notepad. Supposedly, you shouldn't have xamp running when you do this. Then my notes say do a find, Control F for the word zone, like it's in time zone. There it is. You're at Berlin. My notes say change that to America, Chicago, something like that. Yep. But typically without xamp running, you'd want to do that. So right now my xamp is running, so I'll try to remember to do that later. That gets you the right times, but it can also get you the right dates. This class is in the middle of the afternoon, so it's probably not going to make much difference. But it's amazing. You write this program at this time of day, and then you work on it the next day in the morning, and all of a sudden everything's a little wacky. Or like some of you, you're working at 11 p.m. at night, and all of a sudden your program's telling you it's already tomorrow. So this helps. But then the thought process becomes, well, okay, I've set the time zone for my PHP server, my local host server to America, but what's my server set for at FatCow? It's in Boston or something like that, so it's Eastern time, and I can't control the time zone of the PHP initialization on my server. Can't do it. So if I want to manipulate time somehow, I have to be very careful and do some more processing that I haven't thought much about. So again, this part is optional. With the date create, you can put in a time as well. Or I mean, you can put in a string as well to designate which date you want. Notice this string is in ISO format. If you want to copy a date, you can't just say date 1 equals date 2 because you get 2 pointers to the same date. You can change either one and it'll change both. So you need to clone it. This is to take whatever's in this variable, make a clone of the entire object now is what we're talking about. All of its properties and all of its constants and whatever else it's got. Make a clone of that and call it copy.
That's for objects then?
Probably works for all objects.
I would assume other variable types that is not true.
Correct. Any other variables are just pure variables. I'd have to think about arrays a little bit. I'm not sure if arrays are a class here like they are in many of the other languages. The array is a class. So that's something else to consider. If you want to manipulate dates, and this is part of the homework assignment if I remember right, you can invoke, what's happening here is we're invoking a method on the object named do. This invokes a method. This ought to look familiar, but it's completely different than Swift, right? Swift uses this as a return type symbol. This method / function returns a variable of this type. Here we're invoking, this is like dot notation in all the other languages.
You can use that in C# and C++. Too.
You can use this?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's
Most
hard-
people
it's
don't.
hard
They
to
use it.
understand.
Yeah. It's usually a dot. But in PHP, there's no dot here. We can't say do dot. We want to invoke a method. We have to use the dash and the angle bracket, then the word modify, and then you can get really creative here and say this is plus 3 weeks, minus 5 days, plus 2 years. Pretty simple. Very similar. We did something similar to that in JavaScript.
Can you say plus 1 week that are singular and plural?
Yeah, I'm sure you can. If you need more information on this, I would first just try it, see if it works. Whatever is logical to you, try it. If it doesn't work, then do research on this because this method is based on the string to time function in a timestamp, the old timestamp, and that'll give you the list. If you wish, there is also, and you can format dates. This creates a string. So these are all the different formatting codes. Pretty funky compared to what we're used to. We're used to MMM and MMMM and 1M and 2Ms and capital M's. If you want 2 digits, use little, 1 digit, use an N, M for month, N for month, M, F, holy cow. So I put the list here so that you can find it, but you can create just about any format you want. C gives you this big ugly format. And there's also an R code that gives you that big ugly format. In PHP, even though dates are classes, must have built into it somehow a definition of less than or equal to. You can compare dates to see if they're the same, to see if they, and what's tricky is when you're comparing 2 dates, what happens to the times? Well, normally what you do if you've done a now is set the time to 000. That way, if you're not using the time and you want to compare dates, set the hours, minutes, and seconds to each one to zeros to make sure they're not part of the equation. So you can do a less than or equal to if you need that, and that happens occasionally. There's also a date interval class that gives you even more flexibility for adding dates. We can define a period, is what the P stands for, a time period of 10 days. So in this case, we take now, we execute the add method and send it a period of 10 days. So this adds 10 days to now. Not quite as intuitive as plus 10 days. However, this is just a string, so you might be manipulating the string using a variable. Is it 10 days, 5 days, 30 days? What? Okay. And you can develop this string and add the appropriate number of days to it. Just don't forget the P and the D. Here's subtraction. You can also do a date difference. What's the difference between now and some other date? And you get a time span that can be formatted using these codes to display stuff. How many days apart are these 2 dates? How many minutes apart are these 2 dates? And what's really powerful if you get there is you can create time spans that include 2 weeks, 10 hours. How do I know that's 10 hours? Well, first of all, there's the T. Whenever you have a mix in these time intervals, date intervals, you put a T in whenever you start talking about times in between. So it's kind of like a delimiter between the date component and the time component. So that needs to be there. So the P needs to be there. 2 weeks. Now we're into times, 10 hours, 30 minutes. And again, if you want to display them, you can display those differences using these codes. So that can be handy if you want to tell somebody you have X number of days to go before your subscription expires, before your bill is due, or your bill is overdue by X number of days. You can do some pretty fancy math with the date interval and spit it out pretty quickly.
So if you want to do months, what happens?
Whatever the magic
M
code
is
was here.
minutes.
It has to be before the P.
M
The M has to be, yeah,
before T, then it become months.
yes. That's part of what the T is there for.
Okay.
Okay, the little n's here represent a number like 10D. Okay, and if I
Oh,
want to do months, there it's months, but it's also minutes because it comes after the T. That's how it tells them apart.
So even if you just have the time, you still need the P there.
I believe so, and the P still needs to be there. The P and the T both, if you're just doing times. I have not manipulated times much with this. That makes sense though. Okay, not doing any demos of those, but that's something you'll get a chance to play with in the homework center. Homework, it is day 2.
It's not even week 2.
No, it's not. Okay, input. PHP runs on a server. How do we get user input to a server? You don't.
From another page,
Pardon me?
from another page.
From another page, from a form. Not from another page, from a form. All right. Now we can create a form with just hidden variables where there's no inputs. That's how you communicate one piece of information from one form to another. But typically when we're sending information to the server, it's done from form input. So all those text boxes, all those radio buttons, all those things that we gave names to, and we saw last semester when we sent that to my HTML echo page, whatever it was called, that was a PHP command that was sent. We sent that results to a PHP page. So the form went to the PHP then processed the form data and displayed it to you so that you could see that yes, your data actually made it to my server. We all remember that from last semester, right? Okay. PHP comes from either a post or a get. Murak likes gets if your page is only displaying stuff, but I'm not so sure about that. Remember, the difference between post and get is when the next page displays that data. If you send a post, the data that was sent is not included in the address bar up here. Now I say remember, have we seen that before?
We talked about
Brushed on it. All right. I'm not a big fan of get because if you use a get, any data that came from the form is displayed in the address, added to the end of the address of the next page. So ultimately here we're going to be going from the index page. Okay. We're going to send everything from this form to the results page. And then the results page is going to come up and the address bar is going to say results. And if we change this to a get, everything that was sent to that page shows up after the PHP. All your data gets sent. Maybe we'll switch that one so you can see it. Occasionally that comes in handy so that if somebody goes backwards, they don't usually lose their data. But if they close it and they want to go back and see that with the data filled in, you could bookmark it with all those data things. Occasionally. But Murak's generalization that if you're just displaying data, well, if I'm just displaying the results of another form, that form may have had a password field on it. And yes, we can create a text box that the password is hidden, but behind the scenes, it's just text. And if you do a get with that, do that with credit card numbers, with passwords, the raw text shows up in the address bar. Generally not cool. I don't do a lot of getting unless there's some primary reason I want the user to be able to bookmark that fact.
They do that with searches a lot, like Craigslist or AutoTrader. Like if you
Right.
do an advanced
Exactly.
search,
So if you
you're-
fill out good,
fill out
so
a whole form and you want to save that particular.
you can
search.
save that stuff. But there's no credit cards, probably no personal information. It's just what kind of a car were you searching for. So you can bookmark it, and when you go back to Craigslist, your form, it's as if you filled out the form for a Volkswagen Jetta in red with less than 100,000 miles on it. So yes, that would probably work. And probably the same thing even at Amazon. I'm looking for a book. I found it. I want to come back to this tomorrow. I can bookmark the found page when I got it. Usually that'll appear as a question mark after the page address and then a bunch of other junk. So I prefer post, but I think this oversimplifies it. Get, there has to be a reason like we just described. Post and get, when you send them to the other form, now remember what's happening here. We're going to open our index page, fill out the form, and then send the results, send that data, to the results page. How does the results page capture it? Because our method is post, there is a variable that is automatically created. These are called super global arrays. They are arrays. They're super global variables. Global meaning every method, everybody has direct access to them. All you have to do is reference them by the correct name. Notice they're all caps. Okay. That's an array. It is like a dictionary in the other languages where we have our field name. So maybe it's first name. That's the index, the key, and then the value. So this is more, it's called an array, but it's more like a dictionary in the other languages. These are not indexed 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They are keyed on the field name that you designated in the HTML. So this, not the ID, the name. And that's why I don't put prefixes on them anymore, because by the time they get to the server, they're not DTPs, text boxes. They're nothing. They're just variables. Just data. The ID of the object that's collecting it, that's a text box or a date picker or something. So I've changed my naming standards a little bit in the last year or two. So that's how they get there, post or get. How do you know which one? Well, we could write if statements and check to see if the post array exists. If you send it with post, the get array does not exist. If you send it with get, the post array does not exist. And in the past, we used to have to figure that out. Today, there's a new super global array called request. I don't hardly use the post and get arrays anymore. It's time to move this paragraph up. Because whichever it is, post, get, it'll never be both. Or if it's a cookies array, there's a global array called cookies that we're probably not going to get to in this class. The request array has all that stuff in it, whichever one it is. So you don't have to know which one it is. You just say, give me the contents of the request array.
Does the cookies bring to?
Pardon me?
What does the cookies bring to?
It allows you to extract the cookies from a cookie that your website has created and send that back as a key value pair. So it's like a plist.
If I can go kind of a little off topic.
Oh
here.
boy, here we go.
Now, what are cookies? Like, I hear that thrown around. And
Cookies are ways for your website to retain data on the client when they leave. Because usually when you leave a page, whatever you filled in on that form
so
or who you are, there's all kinds of things that can be stashed in cookies.
So it's information from the site that you're storing locally.
Yes.
Okay.
And that could be, and it's usually generated by the web page itself.
By the site chooses.
Yeah, based on who you are, last time you visited. You could do all kinds of things with cookies. You do have to request them to get them, and you have to, the user has to authorize saving them. If they don't, then your website says there are no cookies. I guess I've never seen you before. Hey, it's nice to meet you instead of nice to see you again. Talked about names. Remember, radio buttons all have the same name. They have different IDs, but they all have the same name. So if you pick your favorite color green, it's in the fave color variable. If you've picked the red radio button, it's in the fave color variable. Checkboxes. I think I demonstrated this, but I want to remind you that checkboxes only send data to the server when they're checked. If they're not checked, nothing gets sent. So if we have a field called married, and we submit the form and the married field is unchecked, there is no married element in this request array that doesn't even exist. It's not like it's false or true, it just doesn't exist. The values you send using a checkbox are almost useless because it either exists or it doesn't, is what we normally process. Does the married element of this array, does the married key exist? If it does, they checked it. If it doesn't, they didn't check it. That's usually how we process checkboxes. So it's something to keep in the back of your mind that occasionally gets a little confusing. You can send a variable with the checkbox. The only reason I can think of to do that is if you check it in this circumstance, I send you this value. If you check it in a different circumstance, I send you that value. Most of the time it's yes or no, it's checked or it isn't. So I almost always use request. There is a post array, there's a get array. I include them because you'll see them in some of the examples. I don't even mess with them. And I haven't checked the latest edition. I don't know if this is the latest edition of Murak's text to see if he's gotten request in there yet. A couple of editions back, he didn't even have it in the book yet. But I don't mess with post or get because request covers it. And as far as I can tell, it's no less efficient. It's just an array, so I use it exclusively. Murak definitely doesn't mention this, but there is a function built into the language, PHP, called extract. And this is very, very handy. We use it a lot. What extract does is it takes this array, dictionary, and turns it into variables. So if I have a form with two fields, first name and last name, and that's their names, the name properties of those text boxes, okay, and the user types in Volcker and Gall, I can access the first name by doing this, kind of like all other array processing in other languages, right? That's the array name, square brackets, and then what's the key that you want, and this will return Volcker, this will return Gall. That's not bad. But if you use extract instead, is what happens is the extract function looks inside here and it declares two variables, one named $first name, another one called $last name. It declares them for you and automatically sticks the values in there. So if you want the first name field value, you simply say $first name after you've done an extract. Very, very handy. This gets tiresome with all the quotes and square brackets and stuff. You just do one extract, and then from then on, you have variables for every element of that array.
Wouldn't that get confusing with checkboxes though? Because you're not going to get a true false, or
You're going to find out the extract just won't generate it, so you can say if $married exists. If I think there's an if exists, if I remember right. Right. We can do an if exists, and I believe we can simply do an if $married. If it doesn't exist, that's the same as false. If it does exist, it's got a value in it, that's going to be true. I forget the exact syntax. We'll see that in another unit.
I was just referring to if you use extract and you have a checkbox and it is checked, you're not going to get a variable as a boolean. You're going to get a variable as a string of whatever that.
Yes, it'll have some value in it, but again, most of the time, I don't care. Does it exist is what I'm interested in. What value it has, most of the time, I don't care. There's flexibility there. So you could have a multi-state checkbox if you wished somehow, some magic thing, so that if you check it and it's nighttime, you get this value. If you check it as daytime, you get a different value. But I'm stretching. Most of the time, all I care about with checkboxes is does that variable now exist, because extract creates variables. So I can now refer to $first name. Still need the dollar sign. I can refer to $first name. But I have to extract first. Go ahead.
Is there a way to, if it does exist, so say you say if it exists and it does, is there a way just to change that variable type to a boolean and set it to true?
Yeah.
So you can manage.
If exists, you can just say exists or married, $married, $M.
Equals true.
Equals
Okay.
this one dot, if exists this variable, whatever, I forget the syntax of the function, but yeah, you can convert. You can double equal it. You could, it's probably if exists. We'll see that in, I think it's the next unit we see that. Print R is a handy function. And the print R function displays the contents of an array. R is short for array. So it's just a shortcut method of saying here, and I think Swift did it too, right? We could say print line and array, and it just gave us this chain of events, chain of values. If you do a print R on request, for instance, very common, it'll give you a big old long ugly string of key values or key value pairs. But very convenient for, I sent my form, did you get my data? Why is it that when I ask for this variable, it doesn't exist and I get it's empty? Well, because you misspelled it on the form. Because if you misspell it here, guess what happens when you get to the other end? The variable name is misspelled, and then you spell it right with a $sign, and it goes, there's nothing in there. Well, why? Why not? I sent it. Well, you look at the request array and you read it carefully, and you don't see it, so you call me over and I smack you and say, how do you spell array or whatever, and you fix it. So I've been warning you, and it's only going to get worse, that you can make HTML errors that cause problems in your PHP on the server side.
Mhm.
And then you can create HTML using PHP that causes errors on the HTML side, that causes errors when you submit the form, that causes, never mind. But there's this vicious circle in your HTML, and if you put JavaScript in a loop, it's another problem, because we can write PHP to generate JavaScript. Had some people do that last year in the systems project. Holy mind-boggling. Now my JavaScript function changes based on what the server creates. It worked. It was slick. But talk about your maintenance nightmare. I've got PHP that generates JavaScript that changes based on some certain circumstance. That's bizarre. So this is very common. Don't forget semicolon. And it creates this ugly thing. What I'm going to show you, let me see, I might actually still have it here. I again have some Voker tools. You don't see them unless they're hiding in here someplace. These are utility functions. These are PHP functions. Notice the PHP is still required. This is an include file. PHP is required, and then there's an end PHP at the end. And here's another little warning that I'm going to say 6 times. If you plan on putting this in a Linux server, there better not be any blank lines after the end of this. Gotta be kidding. Works great locally, and you send it to a Linux server. If there's a blank line here, all of a sudden this function, this whole include file doesn't work the way you expect it to, and try to debug that. Because there's nothing wrong. You can echo it to death, and there's still nothing wrong. And I only discovered it because I finally ended up retyping these things, and one day went, the blank line really took it out. Everything worked. That's terrible. Here's my version of print array. It's not print R, it's print array. And let's see, I can pull that up if I shrink this a little bit. Here's my print R function. I send in the array as a variable. So we're getting ahead of ourselves writing functions, but this shouldn't be anything real new, except it's the word function. Name of the function. Any list of parameters, no types necessary. So here, whenever you call this, you have to send it an array like request. And what does this do? It echoes, what's that? Anybody know? Well, first of all, what do the angle brackets tell you?
HTML.
It's HTML. Pre-tag means pre-formatted. Do not mess with carriage returns. Don't remove blank spaces. Don't do anything. This is pre-formatted. This print R actually generates a pre-formatted, nice and stacked and beautiful stuff. But as soon as you put it into HTML, it goes, makes it ugly. Put pre-tags around it, then it comes up on the top of your page, all nice and pretty. So this is in my utilities. All it does is put pre-tags around it. I finally got tired of we used to type them all the time. Pre-tag, print array in PHP, and then another pre-tag. So now I have print array function so that it always prints them pretty. makes your request arrays or whatever it is you're looking for much easier to read. I'll share that with you again in the future. So print array is handy, but it literally goes across the top of the page and wraps if it needs to. It's ugly. It can be hard to read sometimes. Putting pre-tags around it, it comes up in a pre-formatted monospace font with each key value pair on a separate line. Much easier to read. Takes up a whole lot more room. Print array is not anything you leave generally in your finished product. It's another testing tool. Show me what's in my array. We talked about scope. Now I'm not writing much code here. I'm going to go back and finish and probably do that on Monday. Am I in the right class? Yeah. On Monday, we'll probably go back and take a look at the index page, see if there's anything there we really need to do. But write the code in the results page to accept the data from that weights program and process its results. And then display. Variable scope. Any variables defined inside of PHP tags are available to other PHP tags. So you could have a little PHP tag that creates a variable, sticks the word Volker in there for whatever reason, and then 100 lines later, after a bunch of HTML, refer to the variable name. The PHP, you could picture them as one big, huge chunk of code. However, if you're in a function, any variables declared inside of functions, like D, okay, it's only available inside that function. We will later declare some variables outside. This utility library doesn't have any variables declared outside of a function. If you declare them outside, they're global. Sorta. I don't have any global variables here that I can see, but anytime you want access to a global variable, you have to ask for it. It's not like in any other language. Any other language, a global variable, you just go for it. In PHP, when you declare a global variable and you want to use it, have access to it inside of a function, you got to ask for it. There's a global command. I don't think that's in these notes. It'll show up a little bit later. That's probably when we talk about functions. Oh, there it is. I had already. Okay. So if you're inside of a function, you want access to a global variable that was not declared inside of a function, you have to add this and the variable name, global variable name, to get access to it. That one always throws me for a loop. I forget it because I'm used to every other language in the world. As far as I know, you declare something outside, it's global. You just use it. Here we have to request permission to access it, basically.
So does it create a new one?
No. So I can change it. I can read it, I can update it, I can use it and calculate. I can use it like a local variable.
No, but if you forget the global, does it create a new one? It's a local instance.
No. Because I can change it, and it'll change the global one. If it was local, then if I changed it, it would be changing the local one, right? And it would never leave the function. Anything you do to A inside the function changes A permanently.
Even if you forget the global, is what I'm saying.
If you forget the global, you're using a local one.
You create a local.
Then you're absolutely using a local internal to the function, and the value that you expect to be in A isn't there. And that's how you find out that, oops, I forgot the global. You put an echo command, say, show me what's in A. Nothing. But it's global.
I would assume even the global variables are only retained while that page is there. If you change pages, they go away. If you change and come back.
There's no such thing as after you go away. Everything disappears. Because this page is created.
So they only.
Remember, this is PHP. What happened to my PHP when I got to the page? It's all gone, right? So what happens to all your variables? They're all gone. PHP is used to create an HTML page. Once the page is created and sent, this processing is done, that variable stuff. What if I want to retain values between pages? So called session variables. And those are another one of those, like true global variables, you avoid them at all cost. but occasionally you need them.
Although you could make a hidden variable on your page if you wanted to send.
And keep sending it back and forth is another solution, yes. And initially that'll be our solution to the problem. One of the most common uses of session variables are logins. Have you successfully logged in? Well, when I'm bouncing back and forth between 60 different pages on my website, I don't want to have to log in every single time or send the fact that I logged in to every single page. So you create a session variable and you check to see if the session variable exists. If it does, you've logged in. If not, you immediately divert to the login page. So that's a common one, but that's Unit 7, right? And I think the title in Unit 7, which is the last unit in the class, is session variables. So we can get a lot done without them.
Does the global go on the variable when you declare it globally or when you
No.
use it in the function?
When you use it in a function. In the function is requesting access to or telling PHP, I'm accessing this global variable
And you have to use it each time.
in every function.
So if you use A 5 times in the function, you have 5.
No. If you use A in 5 different functions, this is a one-time like declaring a variable. At the beginning of the function, you list your global variables.
Okay.
Yes. And you can list 5 or 6 of them here with commas if you wish. That's typically what I do if I need that many. I'm not a big fan of global variables. We talked about this in other classes. I prefer to send data from one method to another. It makes your methods a little more flexible, a little more reusable. But sometimes global variables are a better solution.
If you're only using it once, can you just do it inline? Like
Inline.
Global A equals something, if that's the only time you're using it.
No, you have to use this statement and then process.
Okay, so that you
This is not a processing statement. This is I'm using this global variable statement, end of statement. If you then later want to use it or assign something to it, that's a separate command. All right, we're out of time, but this is page 11, so I think we're done. Yep. So when we come back on Monday, remind me where I am because I might forget, but what I want to do is go into this application, and I don't think there's much to do here because we already have a form, and once we're done, it posts. What we need to do is write code on the results side with a fair amount of PHP to accept the results from that page. We're going to do some calculations with them, and then ultimately display the results. This is what came in, and here's where we're going to display the results. So we're going to do processing, and we're going to do echoing, and we're going to display results and probably format some stuff, manipulate the dates a little bit. But we've got the syntax out of the way. It's 5 days to the next class. I know you can't wait to write PHP, so let's take a look at the second assignment, or second unit assignment. Okay, the first one, if I remember, what did I miss there? Tickets. Okay, so here's the first assignment. Business traveler wants a tip calculator. Oh, here's a classic. Okay, wants a tip calculator. Here's the stuff that we need to collect on a form. So your first job is to create a form again, using all the skills you learned last semester. My advice, create the form. I don't remember if it says we got to do validation here. Maybe this one doesn't. Appropriate image, oops, yep, required, auto capitalize, auto format, less than 2, guess what? Validation on the JavaScript side. Great.
Morning.
Not quite, but anyways, so then a button that calculates and displays a receipt. Now this is lying, the button does not calculate, the button doesn't display, the button simply submits the form with all its data to a results page, a receipt page, whatever you want to call it, that displays in this format. You must format it like this. Part of the exercise is getting it to look the way my requirements designate.
Same order and everything?
Same order, border probably not, and the spacing here not necessarily, but I would like stuff to line up right. So decimal places line up and decimal places line up. So if the bill is $99.99, the tip is going to be something, the total is going to be 100 and something. I don't want the 9 and the 1 lined up. I want the decimal places lined up. So you may start working on it. You already know how to build forms. Maybe just start there so that you're not swamped when the time comes. Because you know me, I'm going to give you about 2 hours to write this thing. All right, enough for that class.